Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that because if you listen to media, I mean, I guess from both sides of the aisle, first of all, there's some people even at the meeting on May 16th to say, where's the evidence of fraud? Fraud doesn't happen. The elections are there's no, I mean, maybe even there's no potential that there's no fraud. Why are you removing this? You're sowing distrust by saying that there's fraud. At the same time, you have both, sides of the aisle at times saying, hey, there have been some bad actors. There have been some things involved, whether it was 2016 or 2020. We're not going to get into those details, but people on both sides of the aisle have at least at times raised concerns that there could be potentially fraud and issues. And I want to talk about, Commissioner Parsons, about the issue of ballot harvesting, the issue of what can happen with these mail-in ballots, because under Act 77, theoretically, every single voter could vote by mail. And we don't think that's going to happen, but theoretically, that's what the law allows. And so with that, you have thousands of more mail-in ballots than you would have normally had, just the absentee ballots for those specific cases. So I want you to speak to that, because people are saying, where's the fraud? Point to examples for us. And you've already mentioned, I mean, even in this interview with Governor Wolf and certain things like that, even though that wasn't done, we would say, to influence the results of the election. However, when we get to integrity and people's perception and the potential for fraud or the potential for error, that's a concern. So can you speak on Act 77, mail-in ballots, why this is a potential for mischief or fraud in our elections?
Well, I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is counties execute elections, but counties have to do so based on state law. We don't make the state law. We're provided and by the legislature and the governor. And we don't like the law, but we've got to execute it the best we can. And so what our job is to do everything we can to make sure that we have a secure, transparent, fair system in Lancaster County, understanding that we're working with the laws that are provided us. And that's what we've been trying to do. The law says that you may not bring in anyone else's ballot except yours unless you have that special form because you're helping someone that, whether they have a disability or something else and they can't make it in. So that's a small exception. But other than that, you may not bring anyone's ballot in. When the law was first passed, almost nobody knew that. Almost nobody knew that you can't bring in your spouse's ballot. Technically, you're not even allowed to take your spouse's ballot to the mailbox. And that is a misdemeanor. It's punishable by jail time. It's a serious thing. And basically, that's just being ignored by people. And, I think the average person, I have not advocated that someone who mistakenly brings their spouses in should be prosecuted. The law should not be a trap to trap people. But certainly if someone is intentionally going out and harvesting multiple ballots from other people, that is an integrity concern because you don't know what they're doing with those ballots. You don't know if they're changing them. That ballot is as Ray said, it's the currency of our election. There should be controls on that. And that's why the law says that you may only handle your own, essentially. And, the governor went on the radio and basically flouted that, in my view, and said he gave it to his wife. I think a lot of people didn't know. Some still don't know that you can't do that. But the governor certainly did because he signed the law. And so that is a illegal act. And, we should work to do everything we can to prevent that, either people unintentionally breaking the law or intentionally. And, that is a concern, people going around and gathering up ballots and then putting them in a drop box or putting them in the mail. There's not a whole lot we can do to control that out in the community, but what we can do is control it here. And so if you bring in a ballot now, you have to hand it to a person in the elections office. And if you try to hand in more than one, they're going to prevent you from doing that.
So the potential is there, and I think you've mentioned some examples, and maybe if you have any more specifics, that potentially people could, we've seen mailings going out for people to request mail-in ballots.
Yeah, which is another huge problem. So you have third parties sending multiple flyers to people. So if you're a voter, they send a third party, a political party, or a candidate sends
Partially filled
a
application.
partially filled out application to you. And some people actually mistake that and think it's a mail-in ballot. It's not. It's a mail-in ballot application saying, here, send in your application, and then you will get a mail-in ballot. So it has caused a lot of confusion in the community. So they're basically trying to generate more people to send in mail-in ballots, and that shouldn't be allowed either.
Yeah, and some of those were ostensibly signed by Governor Wolf, whether he did that or not. His name was on there. People received these saying this is from the office of Governor Tom Wolf, and it looks very official, and
Right.
they might feel like, oh, I have to fill this out.
It created a lot of confusion. We got a lot of calls and questions about that.
So the other potential, you mentioned this, and maybe just reiterate, people can, it's possible with this system, it's at least easier to go and collect ballots from people and perhaps manipulate them in some way, because there's no longer, under the Constitution, everybody's either going to that actual location and you're going in there and you're casting your vote. So there's not a gap there, whereas with the mail-in ballots, it's possible for people to collect these ballots and then take them to a drop box or to a mailbox, even though that's fine under the law right now, and there could be manipulation in that period.
Yeah, and if you strip away all the control measures, so if you go and vote in person, you have to sign a poll book. I actually think you should have to provide voter ID too, like many states do and many countries do. But at least you have to sign a poll book. We had the Pennsylvania Supreme Court rule that with mail-in ballots that you can't check the signatures. So there's very little security on them. So if you strip away all the security measures, I think it's fair for people to wonder whether that is an appropriate and secure system.
It's striking to me how certain folks can question why there's a question of integrity. When you hear what we're talking about, it's just a simple matter of making sure that people feel that their sacred vote is being handled properly. When you strip away and you don't take seriously that vote and how it transpires, that's an issue, and that's why people are raising questions. Republican or Democrat shouldn't matter. We should all be on the same page when it comes to veracity, integrity, and transparency in our elections. And how we get there.
Because you want the loser of the election to believe in the election. And if you remember, after the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, when there was the first democratic elections, what they did was have everyone dip their finger in purple ink to prove that you had voted that day. And so that you didn't have a person who voting more than once. I'm not saying we should do that, but you want as secure a system as possible so that both the winner and the loser have faith in that system. I think that's fair regardless of your party or political views.
I'll give you another example of something that happened, where the Department of State at the time in 2020 came down and said that we should do ballot curing. We even talked about some other things about Act 77. But ballot curing was also where is against the law, where giving someone the opportunity to change their vote or change their ballot after it was turned in. We said no, it was not. First of all, it wasn't a court order; it was something that was guidance. And we stood up and said no, because why? It hurts voter. First of all, it's against the law. Second, it hurts voter integrity. We're not going to do it. We didn't have to because it wasn't law, but we caught a lot of flack for that, quite frankly, holding those ballots, if you will, until a court order. Thank goodness the U.S. Supreme Court weighed in and said, no, don't count